Congo. Members of civil society blame the Allied Democratic Forces, that is ADF, a group linked to the so-called Islamic State, for the attack on Saturday in the province of Ituri. And Idudon Malangaye, acting chairman of the chiefdom of Walese Vonkutu, initially said 14 people died, but told AFP that more bodies had been discovered in the bush and the toll could be further. A UN source confirmed that at least 30 people had died in the attack. One civilian who helped look for bodies said the victims had mostly been attacked with machetes or shot.
Arrested us, they repressed us. We asked the authorities to put everything in motion so that we can see that MONUSCO can return home, because it is not normal that people continue to be killed in Beni and we as citizens can remain in insecurity, and that MONUSCO stands by without intervening. Almost 300 youths took part in a dangerous impromptu search across 45 kilometers of the bush territory on Friday, looking for Allied Democratic Forces militant ADF, believed to be behind the killings of almost 2,000 civilians since 2017.
All right, so let me bring in Abel Oyeyo into this conversation about the coup that we're seeing in Africa. And he is the researcher at the Center for African Progress and also a regional affairs analyst. Mr. Oyeyo, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here on Bottomline Africa today.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure having you come so that we can have an in-depth discussion on what is making the headlines within the African continent. So let's begin with what we are seeing in Guinea. Was this bound to happen?
Well, you know, the history of the region dictates that some things will happen from time to time. And I can tell you it was bound to happen because it had happened in Mali, you know. And the West African part of the continent has been, you know, affected by coups from, I think, as early as the 1970s, when most of these countries began, you know, getting their independence. And given the manner in which the president, of course, messed up the constitution in 2020 October, you know, the referendum and all that, and then the decision for him to vie afresh, you know, there was wide protests, there were riots. I think the military felt like there was no escape, there was no rescue for the people, so they had to actually move in. And now they have a playbook from which they were copying all this, because when you look at what happened in Mali, the argument was the leadership has failed to live up to the expectations of the people, the dreams of the people. So the same argument was used by the military, of course, in Guinea, led by Colonel, you know, Doumbouya.
Yeah, but then this is, if I'm not wrong, this is the fourth time, this is the fourth attempted coup in West Africa in just over a year.
Yeah, because, you know, there's a serious problem with leadership in West Africa, and not just in West Africa, but in most parts of the continent. The problem we have here is the Western countries like France, Britain, the US, keep on supporting, you know, puppets and dictators who suppress and oppress the people. So long as you're supported by the French, you know, you can keep on stealing and oppressing your people, and then, you know, you can extend your term whichever way you want. Now, Africans are getting tired. If you've been, you know, following what has been going on, we have so many young men trying to cross over to Europe in search of greener pastures. So that kind of suffering has to stop. So, you know, the modern African soldier is someone who's gone to school, they access information, they know, even as people suffer here, there's a group of people, the ruling class, who steal so much money. And that is the same problem that is in Guinea as we speak. The country is very rich. They have so many minerals.
Natural resources.
Yeah, they have gold, they have bauxite, they have, you know, and the economy has been growing very, very nicely over the last 10 years.
Right.
But you see, the beneficiaries are just about 3 to 5% in a country of 13 million people. So the people down here have been suffering without feeling the impact of that growth.
Right.
So these military men decided now enough is enough. And the beautiful thing is they've said, we don't want to destroy our country. What we want to do is to make sure we have elections so that these guys can do what? Can go away.
But is it about elections really? Because what we are seeing right now is like the military takeovers on the rise in the African continent. Because I mean, military coups have been a regular occurrence in Africa in the decades since independence.
Now, one of the reasons why, you know, when you have structures that function, then you can trust the system to run without interference from the military. For example, in the US, let's say, if you look at what Trump tried to do, all the mess he created, the Congress, the Senate, the judiciary, the systems work. They can bring all these guys to book, and they can be prosecuted. In African countries, institutions are not independent. You cannot bank on them to, for example, prosecute culprits or perpetrators of corruption. This is why these military coups are unavoidable. At some point, they have to happen. When you just seated in the barracks and then you watch someone has stolen so much money, and then maybe it's the president, the head of the judiciary, someone who has been appointed by the president. So all these institutions are held tightly by the same person.
So in short, sorry for cutting you short, but are you trying to tell us that the military coup rather the army, the coup that we are seeing right now, the latest of what is happening in Guinea, is an intervention in national politics?
That is the point, because like I've told you, the president oversaw the amendment of the constitution. And you remember what happened? Initially, it was 2 terms, each of 5 years. What they did is to just add 1 year. From 5 to 6 years, the terms remained 2. And then he came and vied after serving 2 terms. So ideally, he should have actually quit. He should have gone home so that they have elections. And that is what the Guinea people were saying. You've done your 2 terms. It's okay, we've amended the constitution. Now let's have what? Someone else. Let's have an election so that whoever comes in serves under the new constitution.
Right.
So that is the kind of nonsense that the military has said, okay, we don't want this. Once you've served your term, do what? Go away. So we cannot allow African presidents to transform themselves into dictators by using the constitution. You amend the constitution, and then you say, I'm going to vie again afresh. It does not work like that.
All right.
Yeah.
So now when you look at the neighboring Mali, next to Guinea, they had 2 interventions by the army. Now that you're saying that the army looks like, and we are looking at them as the people who are intervening in the national politics of the African countries. So Mali had 2 interventions by the army in less than a year. The most recent one was actually in May, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, it was.
And then now we move on to Niger, where a coup was thwarted in March, just days before presidential inauguration. So clearly it means that a military intervention occurring more often on the continent. Is it because the leaders, the incumbents, are not seeing the telltale signs, or they do not have their inner person within the military? Because allow me to give an example. Like you see our neighboring country, Uganda, we have a relative to the president, Yoweri Museveni, within the military. So within these other African countries where the coups have been successful, is it that they don't have an insider to inform the president and let the president know that there's something that's being planned against you as a way of trying to intervene on national politics?
Thank you so much. Now, snitches or spies will always be there. You can put a relative there, family member, someone from your tribe. But when guys plan such events, they can be so creative to a point where the person you've put there can either be misled or gets totally isolated to a point where they cannot collect any useful information for you. And in some cases, some of these guys are actually party to all this. You remember what happened in DRC? There's a rumor that the son murdered the father to take over. So sometimes it happens like that. So the point is, most of these guys who can be put in the military to collect information to share with the president or whoever is in power can be kept in the dark as all these things are being planned. And in Mali, as we said, elections are being planned. I think they should be held next year. That is what whoever, the guys, Assimi, promised, and I hope that happens. So the point is, when there's no point of salvation for the people, these interventions by the military are very much welcome. So it should be a warning sign to presidents, prime ministers, and other heads of government that once you've been given a position and a chance to serve, make sure you deliver for the people. Because
But isn't it not illegal? Because, I mean, every country has a laid-down procedure on the takeover of leadership, handing over power from one leader to the next. And what the military has been doing, it looks like it's illegal because, I mean, we cannot forget the 2017 incident of what happened to Robert Mugabe, the late Robert Mugabe, the former president of Zimbabwe.
I'm glad you've talked about Zimbabwe because, the military gave Mugabe a lot of time, and what he did is to destroy the country. When you read the history of Western civilization, military intervention was everywhere until there was an element of transparency and stability in government. So if these guys were given a chance to serve, don't get to learn, these interventions will always be there. Citizens cannot suffer forever, like, you know, just because there's an election, someone means the constitution comes on. Some of these guys want to die in office. The guy in Guinea is 83 years old. Ideally, should have gone home after serving his term of 10 years. So if this does not happen, what you will see is some of these guys dying in office, and then they want to create monarchs. Like once you die at 90...
So military coup is the only option.
When people suffer so much and the government has been crushed, the opposition has been crushed, some of these guys have been, you know, converted into cronies of these dictators, the best way out for the people, coups.
All right, but how come these coup leaders invariably deny their action as coup in an effort to appear legitimate, you know, when it comes to the action they've taken?
That is because of the kind of negative connotation that we've given the whole thing of military coups. And we shouldn't do that, apart from cases where they're not necessary. You know, if a government is functioning, intervention by the military is uncalled for. That is something that should be condemned at all times. But when people are suffering, there's a legitimate, you know, need for intervention by the military so that there's, you know, an element of salvation for the people. Because we cannot talk about, oh, you know, the systems, the institutions do not work. And I want to give you an example. I'm not saying Kenya is ripe for military intervention, but I'm saying that...
but we had one some time back,
yeah,
which failed.
Yeah. There are so many cases of corruption we have. Like, we lost a lot of money to KEMSA, I mean, a few days ago. And as Kenyans were dying, and they are still dying of COVID-19. No one has been taken to court as we speak. So institutions in Africa don't work. So that is why when people suffer so much, and all these guys have been, you know, taken in and put into the pockets of the leaders, it's the military who can come in and help. So it's not all coups that have to be condemned as evil or bad. Sometimes it's the only way the citizens have to, you know, the entry of a different government. The unfortunate thing is the intervention comes in, another government comes in, takes the same form, and then, you know, we have a cycle from coup to coup to coup. But
then at the same time, yes, you know, it's like you're trying to legitimize, to say, yes, not all coups are bad. It's okay to have coups as a way of trying to bring stability, the national political stability in a country. But then when a country has had one coup, it looks like we'll be expecting more coups within the country that has been affected.
Now, there's what we call tradition in every country, and if you've been given a chance to be a leader, let's say a president or prime minister, head of government, you have a duty, you have a responsibility to make sure the institutions work, and there's evidence that they can actually work, so that any intervention by the military is kept at bay. Because let's say I'm a commander today and I decide, okay, I'm going to take over the government. And then it's a government which has convinced the people, of course, practically it's actually working, I'll not have support. I'll not be supported by anyone. So transparency helps. Like in the US government now, when they do something, if it's an investigation, it's done in the open. If it's someone who's stolen money, they're arrested, it's done in the open. So there is no need for the military to intervene. But when you do things in the dark and you pretend you're serving the people and actually you're not, then you'll not have support. You'll be, you know, deposed. And,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just draw it nearer home, you know. When we look at Sudan, and Sudan has had the most in terms of coups, the number of coups they've had, with 15 of them successful. And the most recent one, if you can't remember, was back then in 2019, just 2 years ago, with the removal of Omar al-Bashir, head of state, following months of a popular protest. So while popular uprising are legitimate, the way you put it, and are people-led, the way you've put it, its success is often determined by the decision taken over by the military at the end of the day. It's not by the new leader who's going to take over.
Say that again.
I'm saying, I just brought it back home, you know, near our neighboring country of South Sudan, having 15, and the recent one being back in 2019 when Omar al-Bashir was removed as the head of state following months of popular protest.
Yes.
And when we are in the middle of this conversation, I'm just tying that with what you had said earlier on. You say that while the popular uprising of what we're seeing within the African region are legitimate, because that is what the military sort of are trying to tell, people within the African continent. This is legitimate and it's led by the people. But at the end of the day, don't you think that it's often determined, the decision on who's going to take over the leadership of the country is determined by the military itself?
Yes, most of the time, I think 100% of the time, it's the military should have to decide who takes over. And that is where now international organizations come in so as to give direction. You realize when Bashir was deposed or removed, there was pressure from the African Union, of course, and our Western partners to make sure, to tell the military to make the ground ready for an election. And the power of the people through protest is, of course, the best. Like in Guinea now, we could have wanted to see the 13 million Guineans, going to the streets and protesting and making sure that Conde does not participate in last year's election where, of course, again, he won. The point is, most of the time, citizens are oppressed, they're beaten. These protests and riots are broken down with a lot of violence and due force by, the police forces of all these countries that have been, incorporated into the corrupt governments. So that is why, most of the time, the structure you cannot, most of the time, control or twist is the military. So that's where they actually have to come in.
All right.
Like, it's not like we didn't have protests in Guinea. They were there. When this referendum was being held, when the election was being held, the guys were protesting, but it never led to anything. The guy was elected, he got to office, and they continued making as usual. The corruption went on. From what I've been able to do, to collect from my research, the infrastructure is zero. It's so bad in Guinea as we speak. Then there's a group of guys, businessmen.
All right, as we wind up.
Yeah, who take all the money that the country makes from the proceeds of the minerals they have. So the guys down there don't get anything. So it's a trickle-down economy which does not work. Like, poor money at the top, I'd expect it to trickle all the way to the ground.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Abeloye. Clearly, from what you're telling us, Africa has experienced more coups than any other continent. You're talking about Burundi, Sierra Leone, we're talking about Niger. Now the latest is Guinea. So a developing story right there. We'll continue giving you more updates. But then, Abeloye, thank you so much for joining us here on Bottomline Africa. Today is a researcher at the Center for African